The city lights blinked on, one by one, painting streaks of orange and yellow across the darkening sky. But for Sarah, the fading light meant her workday was just beginning. She wasn't an office worker who got to watch the sunset from a warm desk. No, Sarah was a cleaner, and her shift started when most people were heading home. Every evening, she pulled on her worn uniform, its fabric softened by countless washes, and trudged to the towering skyscraper that dominated the city skyline. Her hands, rough from years of scrubbing and polishing, ached constantly. Her back often complained with a dull throb that settled in after just a few hours. Sarah was tired, bone-weary in a way that sleep rarely fixed. Each day felt like pushing a heavy rock uphill, only to find it had rolled back down by morning. She cleaned offices, hallways, and bathrooms, always moving, always working, yet she felt completely invisible. People walked past her as if she were part of the furniture, a silent fixture in the background of their busy lives. No one looked her in the eye. No one offered a kind word. It was as if her existence began and ended with the swirl of her mop and the shine of a freshly wiped surface. She cleaned for her daughter, a bright spark of joy who deserved more than Sarah could currently give. Every dollar she earned, every aching muscle, was for little Lily. Lily's smile was the sun that warmed Sarah's otherwise cold world. It was for Lily that Sarah endured the endless hours, the thankless tasks, and the feeling of being unseen. She dreamt of a small, cozy home, a place where Lily could have her own room, a place where the air didn't smell faintly of disinfectant. But those dreams felt far away, locked behind a wall of unpaid bills and rising costs. Sarah moved through the empty offices like a ghost, her cleaning cart rattling softly as she pushed it down the long corridors. She knew every inch of this building, every smudge, every dust bunny that dared to settle. She knew which offices left crumbs on their desks and which ones had stacks of papers that never seemed to move. She was a silent observer of the corporate world, a world she was not truly a part of, yet she kept it sparkling. The fluorescent lights hummed above her, casting a stark, unforgiving glow on the polished floors. Sarah adjusted the bandana covering her hair, a small attempt to add a splash of color to her drab uniform. She paused for a moment, leaning against her cart, and let out a soft sigh. Her reflection in the shiny floor showed a woman with tired eyes, a faint line of worry etched between her brows. She was a woman who worked hard, who struggled, who was trying her best in a world that often felt indifferent. And yet, despite the weariness, there was a quiet strength in her gaze, a stubborn resilience that refused to break. This was Sarah, the invisible cleaner, about to be seen in a way she never expected. The hum of the fluorescent lights was a constant companion to Sarah's nightly routine. But one evening, a different kind of buzz filled the air, a nervous energy that even the quiet cleaners couldn't ignore. Whispers, hushed and quick, darted through the hallways like startled mice. A new boss was coming, they said. Not just any new boss, but the new boss, Mr. Kane, who had bought the company. Sarah didn't usually pay much attention to the comings and goings of the upper management. To her, they were just faces in expensive suits, rarely seen, even more rarely acknowledged. But Mr. Kane was different. Even before he officially arrived, his reputation spread like a chill through the building. The office workers, usually so busy and loud during the day, became strangely quiet. Their laughter died down. Their chatter turned into low murmurs. When Mr. Kane finally made his appearance, it was like a sudden drop in temperature. He was tall, very tall, and moved with a strange, silent grace. His suits were always dark, perfectly tailored, making him look even more imposing. But it was his face that truly caught people's attention. It was unnaturally pale, almost white, as if he hadn't seen the sun in years. His eyes were a startling shade of blue, so light they seemed to glow in the dim office light. They were sharp, always watching, missing nothing. Sarah saw him only once, a fleeting glimpse as he stepped out of the private elevator that led straight to the top floor. He walked past her cleaning cart without a glance, his face as still as a statue. Yet a shiver ran down her spine. There was something about him, a coldness that seemed to seep into the very air around him. It wasn't just that he was quiet or serious. It was a deeper, unsettling aura. Soon, stories began to circulate, told in hushed tones during coffee breaks, and whispered quickly in empty stairwells. Mr. Kane was a billionaire, everyone knew that, but he was also known for being utterly ruthless. People said he never smiled, never laughed, and never showed any warmth. He fired people without a second thought, not because they were bad at their jobs, but sometimes just because he felt like it, or to make a point. The company, once a place with a friendly, if busy, atmosphere, now felt like a place walking on eggshells. Even the security guards, big men who usually joked with Sarah, seemed to shrink in his presence. Their usual confident stances turned into stiff, watchful poses whenever he was near. The feeling of fear was thick, a heavy blanket that covered every floor, every office, every person. It wasn't just a fear of losing their jobs. It was a deeper, more primal fear. A fear of the unknown, of something powerful and uncaring. Sarah, who had always felt invisible, now noticed that even the invisible were affected. Her fellow cleaners, usually a chatty group, now worked in near silence, their eyes darting around, always on edge. Mr. Kane hadn't said a word to any of them, hadn't even acknowledged their existence, yet his presence was everywhere. He was a shadow, a chill, a silent threat. And Sarah, who had faced many hardships, felt a new kind of unease settle in her heart. This man was not just a boss. He was something else entirely. The oppressive quiet that Mr. Kane brought with him settled over the building like a thick fog. Sarah had gotten used to the hushed tones and nervous glances, but it still felt wrong. The air was heavy with unspoken fear, a stark contrast to the easy camaraderie that used to exist even among the night shift workers. Then came the news about Maria. Maria was another cleaner, a kind woman with a laugh that could brighten even the dingiest hallway. She had a habit of leaving little notes for the office workers, wishing them a good day or reminding them to take a break. She brought in homemade cookies for her fellow cleaners and always had a warm smile ready. She was one of the few people who actually saw Sarah, who would stop to chat for a moment, asking about Lily. One Tuesday evening, Maria didn't show up for her shift. Sarah heard it from another cleaner, a whisper that made her stomach clench. "Maria's gone," the woman mumbled, her eyes wide with fear. Mr. Kane fired her, said she was too distracting and lacked proper focus. Sarah felt a surge of disbelief, then a hot wave of anger. Maria? Distracting? All Maria did was spread a little kindness in a place that desperately needed it. She was diligent, thorough, and never caused any trouble. To fire her for being too distracting was absurd. It was clear to Sarah and to everyone else that Mr. Kane had simply wanted to show his power. He wanted to make an example, to remind everyone that he was in charge, that he could do whatever he wanted, whenever he wanted, without reason or mercy. The anger simmered inside Sarah, a slow burn that grew hotter with each passing hour. She thought of Maria's sad eyes, the way her shoulders would slump when she talked about her own struggles. She thought of Lily, and how easily a single cruel act could shatter a person's life, especially when they were already struggling. Mr. Kane hadn't just fired Maria. He had crushed a little piece of hope in the building. He had sent a clear message. Kindness was weakness, and humanity had no place in his company. As Sarah pushed her cleaning cart through the now even quieter hallways, her usual weariness was replaced by a fierce indignation. She scrubbed harder, polished with more force, each movement fueled by a growing rage. She imagined Mr. Kane in his pristine office, probably not even remembering Maria's name, having moved on to his next display of power. It was unjust, it was wrong, and it was a slap in the face to every person who worked hard, who tried to make the world a little brighter. For so long, Sarah had been invisible, accepting her place, enduring the hardships for Lily. But seeing Maria, a beacon of warmth, extinguished so carelessly, something inside Sarah snapped. The fear she had felt earlier, the unease about Mr. Kane, was now overshadowed by a powerful, righteous fury. She wasn't just tired anymore. She was furious. And for the first time in a long time, the thought of being invisible no longer felt like a shield, but a burden. She felt a desperate need to be seen, to make a stand, even if it meant risking everything. The thought of confronting Mr. Kane, a man everyone feared, was terrifying, but the thought of letting his cruelty go unchallenged was even worse. The anger inside Sarah didn't cool. Instead, it burned hotter, a fire that pushed away the fear. She spent her shift that night thinking only of Maria, of Lily, and of the unfairness that had become so heavy in the building. As the first rays of dawn painted the sky, a plan, wild and daring, formed in her mind. It was a plan born of desperation and a deep-seated need for justice. The next morning, the building buzzed with the usual morning rush. But Sarah wasn't cleaning. She waited, hiding her cleaning cart around a corner near the executive floor. She knew there was a big meeting scheduled for today, a board meeting where all the important people, including Mr. Kane, would gather. This was her chance. Her heart pounded like a drum against her ribs, a mix of terror and determination. Her palms were sweaty, but her resolve was firm. She watched as a stream of smartly dressed men and women made their way towards the large, polished double doors of the boardroom. Finally, Mr. Kane himself appeared, flanked by two stern-faced assistants. He moved with that same silent, pale grace, his sharp blue eyes sweeping over the hallway, missing nothing. He passed within a few feet of Sarah's hiding spot, and she held her breath, hoping he wouldn't see her. He didn't. He simply entered the boardroom, and the heavy doors swung shut behind him. Taking a deep breath, Sarah pushed her cart aside and marched towards the boardroom doors. Her worn sneakers made almost no sound on the plush carpet. She didn't pause, didn't hesitate. Her hand found the cold metal of the door handle, and with a surge of adrenaline, she pushed it open. The room was filled with rich wood and expensive furniture. Around a huge, gleaming table sat about 20 people, their faces turned towards Mr. Kane, who stood at the head of the table, commanding their attention. A hush fell over the room as Sarah, still in her cleaning uniform, stepped inside. Every eye turned to her, wide with shock. Mr. Kane's pale eyes narrowed, a flicker of something unreadable passing through them. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice calm, but with an edge that could cut glass. Sarah swallowed hard. Her voice, when it came out, was shaky at first, but grew stronger with each word. "You fired Maria," she accused, pointing a trembling finger at him. The words echoed in the suddenly silent room. "You fired her for no reason, just to show everyone how powerful you are? She was a good worker, a kind person. She didn't deserve it." Gasps rippled through the boardroom. Faces turned from Sarah to Mr. Kane, then back to Sarah. No one had ever dared to speak to him like that, not even the highest-ranking executives. Sarah felt a blush creep up her neck, but the anger still fueled her. "You don't care about anyone but yourself," she continued, her voice rising, no longer shaky. "You think you can just step on people, throw away their lives, just to prove a point? Well, you're wrong. You're a cruel, heartless man, Mr. Kane, and it's not fair. It's not right." Her chest heaved. She had said it. She had yelled at the man everyone feared in front of everyone who mattered. The silence that followed her outburst was deafening. No one moved. No one spoke. All eyes were fixed on Mr. Kane, waiting for his furious reaction. The silence in the boardroom after Sarah's outburst was thicker than any fog. It pressed down on everyone, a heavy weight that made breathing difficult. The executives, usually so composed, sat frozen in their expensive chairs, their eyes wide with disbelief and something else, terror. They looked at Sarah, still standing defiantly in her cleaning uniform, as if she had grown two heads. Then their gazes snapped back to Mr. Kane, waiting for the inevitable storm. No one, not even in their wildest nightmares, had imagined such a scene. To interrupt a board meeting was unheard of. To yell at Mr. Kane, the man who ruled with an iron fist and icy stare, was an act of madness. Every person in that room understood the unspoken rules of this company. You did not question Mr. Kane. You did not challenge him. And you certainly did not accuse him of being heartless. A few of the younger executives shifted uncomfortably, their faces pale. They had heard the stories, the quiet rumors of people disappearing from the company without a trace after even the smallest disagreement with the new boss. The older, more seasoned managers just stared, their expressions grim. They knew what was coming. This cleaner, this invisible woman, had just signed her own termination papers, probably in the most public and humiliating way possible. Sarah, though still trembling slightly, held her ground. She saw the fear in their eyes, the shared understanding that she had crossed a line that simply did not exist in Mr. Kane's world. She knew what they were thinking. They expected her to be fired, of course. But not just fired. They expected a swift, brutal end to her employment, a public example made of her to remind everyone else of the consequences of defiance. They probably imagined security dragging her out, her belongings packed in a box, her name scrubbed from the employee list before the day was out. One of Mr. Kane's assistants, a woman with a perfectly coiffed bun and a perpetually worried expression, half rose from her seat, as if to intervene or apologize for the unthinkable breach of protocol. But a cold look from Mr. Kane froze her in place. Mr. Kane himself remained perfectly still. His pale face showed no emotion, no anger, no surprise. His bright blue eyes, however, seemed to bore right through Sarah, as if peeling back layers to see into her very soul. The silence stretched, becoming unbearable. It was a silence filled with unspoken predictions, with the collective certainty that Sarah's fate was sealed. She had dared to challenge the monster, and now the monster would devour her. The air crackled with tension. Everyone held their breath, waiting for Mr. Kane to speak, to deliver the harsh judgment they all anticipated. They fully expected him to unleash a torrent of icy fury, to dismiss Sarah with a single, cutting word, and then to ensure she never set foot in the building again. This was how Mr. Kane operated. This was his power. And Sarah, they all believed, was about to become its latest victim. The thought that she might even make it to the end of the day, let alone return tomorrow, was laughable. She was done, finished, and everyone in that room knew it. Sarah didn't sleep a wink that night. The memory of her own voice, loud and defiant in the hushed boardroom, played over and over in her mind. The stunned faces of the executives, the cold, unreadable gaze of Mr. Kane. It was all burned into her memory. She knew she had crossed a line, a very big line. The logical part of her brain screamed that she was foolish, that she had risked everything for a moment of anger. But another part, a smaller, quieter part, felt a strange sense of peace. She had spoken her truth. She had defended Maria. As the first hint of dawn colored the sky, Sarah got up. She moved slowly, preparing for what she knew was inevitable. She dressed in her uniform, not out of habit, but because it was the only clean clothes she had for work. She packed a small bag, just in case they wouldn't even let her go back to her locker. She imagined the security guards waiting for her at the entrance, ready to escort her out. She pictured the human resources manager, their face stern, holding a termination letter. The walk to the skyscraper felt different this morning. Usually, it was a quiet, almost invisible journey. Today, every step felt heavy, each breath a conscious effort. She braced herself for the stares, the whispers, the official dismissal. She had no doubt that she would be fired. The only question was how publicly and how cruelly it would happen. As she approached the grand revolving doors, her heart hammered. She pushed through them, ready for the confrontation. The lobby, usually bustling with early birds, was strangely quiet. The security guard at the front desk, usually busy with a crossword puzzle, was standing perfectly still, his eyes fixed on something beyond Sarah. He didn't even seem to notice her. Sarah walked towards the time clock, her steps hesitant. She expected her badge to be deactivated, her entry denied. But it slid through the scanner with a soft beep, just like any other day. Confusion flickered through her mind, quickly replaced by renewed apprehension. This was just a trick, she thought. They want to fire me in person, make it official. She made her way to the locker room, her cleaning cart waiting where she had left it. She grabbed her supplies, her movements stiff. Every shadow, seemed to hold a watchful eye, every corner a waiting trap. She kept her head down, avoiding eye contact with the few other cleaners she saw. They too seemed unusually quiet, their faces drawn. They knew. Everyone knew. As she stepped into the elevator, she expected it to be empty, or perhaps to carry her to a meeting with HR. Instead, it was just her. The ride up was agonizingly slow. Each floor she passed felt like a step closer to her fate. She rehearsed what she would say, how she would hold her head high, how she wouldn't let them see her break. When the elevator doors opened on her floor, Sarah took a deep breath. She was ready. She was prepared to be told to leave, to gather her things, to never come back. She had accepted it. But what she saw next was something she could never have prepared for. The elevator doors slid open with a soft sigh, revealing not the usual quiet office floor, but a sight that made Sarah gasp. The main hall, usually a bustling hub of morning activity, was packed. Hundreds of employees stood shoulder to shoulder, stretching as far as she could see down the long, wide corridor. They weren't moving, weren't talking, weren't even rustling papers. They were simply standing in absolute, profound silence. It wasn't a protest, not in the way Sarah understood protests. There were no signs, no angry shouts, no banners. Just a sea of faces, all turned towards her, their expressions a mix of curiosity, confusion, and a strange, quiet expectation. Executives in their crisp suits stood beside junior staff, who stood beside the receptionists and security guards. Even a few of the cleaning staff, usually busy in their own corners, were part of the silent crowd. Sarah felt her cheeks flush, all those eyes on her. For so long, she had yearned to be seen, but not like this, not as the center of such an unnerving tableau. Her heart, which had just begun to calm, started to beat a frantic rhythm once more. She clutched the handle of her cleaning cart, her knuckles white. Was this a public shaming? Was this how they planned to fire her, in front of the entire company, to make an even bigger example? The silence was heavy, almost suffocating. It hummed with unspoken questions and shared apprehension. No one smiled. No one offered a word of greeting or comfort. They simply watched her, their gazes unwavering. It was as if time itself had paused, holding its breath for something momentous to happen. Sarah took a tentative step forward, then another. The polished floor gleamed under the bright lights, reflecting the silent faces. She felt like an actress on a stage, pushed into a play she didn't know the lines to. Her mind raced, trying to make sense of the scene. Why were they all here? Why were they so quiet? Had Mr. Kane called them all for an emergency meeting? But if so, why were they just standing, and why were they all looking at her? She glanced around, searching for a familiar face, someone who might offer a clue, but everyone seemed lost in their own thoughts, their expressions unreadable. The air was charged with an almost electric tension. It was clear that whatever was happening, it was big. It was unprecedented. And, somehow, she was at the very heart of it. A knot of dread tightened in her stomach. This was far worse than simply being handed a pink slip in a quiet office. This was public, grand, and utterly baffling. She swallowed, her throat suddenly dry. She had braced herself for anger, for accusations, for the swift hand of dismissal. She had not braced herself for this overwhelming, collective silence. It felt like the calm before a storm, a stillness that promised a powerful and unpredictable event. Sarah stood frozen, her cleaning cart still clutched in her hands, as the hundreds of silent eyes bore down on her. The air was so thick with unspoken questions that she felt dizzy. Just as her fear threatened to overwhelm her, a new movement caught her eye. Not in front of her, but behind her. A ripple went through the crowd, a subtle shift of heads, as if a new focal point had appeared. Sarah slowly turned, her heart doing a frantic dance in her chest. And there he was, Mr. Kane. He walked with the same silent, graceful stride she had observed before, but something was unmistakably different. His usual dark suit was gone, replaced by clothes that seemed older, richer, a long, dark coat that brushed the floor, a waistcoat made of deep velvet, and a shirt that gleamed white against his pale skin. He looked like he had stepped out of an old painting, not a modern office building. His paleness, which had always seemed like a trick of the light or a sign of poor health, now looked more pronounced, almost luminous. His bright blue eyes, usually so cold and piercing, held a new depth, a flicker of something Sarah couldn't quite name. It wasn't warmth, not exactly, but it wasn't the usual icy indifference either. It was ancient, and perhaps, for the first time, a little vulnerable. He wasn't looking at the crowd. He wasn't looking at the executives. His gaze was fixed solely on Sarah. As he drew closer, the silent employees parted to let him pass, their faces etched with a mixture of awe and terror. They knew him as the ruthless CEO, but today he looked more like the stories whispered in the darkest corners of the building. The Vampire So moniker suddenly felt less like a joke and more like a chilling truth. Sarah felt a strange mix of fear and wonder. This was not the man she had yelled at yesterday. This was someone else, or perhaps the real him. The air around him felt colder, yet at the same time, it held a strange kind of energy, like static electricity before a storm. He stopped just a few feet in front of her. His tall frame seemed to block out the rest of the world. The silence deepened, if that was even possible. Sarah could hear her own ragged breathing, the frantic thump of her heart. She waited, bracing herself for his fury, for the public shaming she had dreaded. But his expression remained unreadable, his pale lips set in a thin line. He raised a hand, and for a terrifying moment, Sarah thought he was going to strike her. But his hand merely moved to the front of his coat, adjusting a fold in the rich fabric. His eyes never left hers. There was a question in their depths, a silent plea that puzzled her. This wasn't the angry, powerful man she had challenged. This was something far more complex, far more unsettling. And in that moment, Sarah realized that whatever was about to happen, it was going to change everything. Mr. Kane stood before Sarah, his unusual attire and intense gaze holding her captive. The silence in the hall was so absolute that Sarah could almost hear the collective breath held by hundreds of people. She braced herself for anything, a sharp rebuke, a public firing, perhaps even a physical shove out of the building. Her heart pounded a frantic rhythm against her ribs, preparing for the inevitable clash. But what happened next defied all expectations. It was so sudden, so utterly unbelievable, that Sarah questioned if her eyes were playing tricks on her. Mr. Kane, the cold, powerful billionaire, the man everyone feared, the vampire so who commanded respect through terror, slowly, deliberately, lowered himself. He didn't stumble. He didn't fall. With a fluid, almost regal movement, he knelt. His long, dark coat fanned out around him as one knee, then the other, touched the gleaming marble floor. He didn't just bend a little. He went down fully, his head bowed slightly, his pale hands resting on his knees. In that instant, the tallest, most imposing man in the room was suddenly the lowest, looking up at Sarah, the invisible cleaner. A collective gasp rippled through the hundreds of employees. It was a sound of pure shock, a sudden release of the tension that had filled the air. Whispers, faint and disbelieving, broke the profound silence. No one could comprehend what they were seeing. Mr. Kane, kneeling? It was an act of humility, of deference, completely at odds with everything they knew about him. Sarah herself felt a jolt run through her. Her grip on the cleaning cart loosened, and for a moment, she thought her knees might give out too. Her mind struggled to process the image before her. This was not the response she had expected. This was not the punishment she had prepared for. This was something entirely new, something that turned the world upside down. His eyes, those startling blue eyes that had once held such chilling indifference, now looked up at her with an expression Sarah had never seen on his face before. It was an expression of deep respect, mixed with something akin to sorrow and even a touch of pleading. It was a look that stripped away the layers of the ruthless CEO and revealed something far more ancient, far more wounded beneath. The executives in the crowd, who had looked so smug and knowing yesterday, now stood with their mouths slightly agape, their faces a mixture of confusion and terror. They had expected fury, a show of force. They had expected Sarah to be crushed. Instead, their fearsome leader had knelt before her. It was an act that spoke volumes, an act that shattered every expectation, every established rule of power in that building. In that single, breathtaking moment, the entire hierarchy of the company was turned on its head, and everyone present knew that nothing would ever be the same. The world tilted on its axis as Mr. Kane knelt before her. Sarah could only stare, her mind reeling. The silence that followed his shocking gesture was even more profound than before, broken only by the frantic beat of her own heart. She watched, mesmerized, as he slowly lifted his head, his luminous blue eyes meeting hers. His voice, when he finally spoke, was not the cold, sharp tone she had heard in the boardroom. It was softer, deeper, carrying an echo of ages past, a resonance that seemed to vibrate through the very foundations of the building. "Sarah," he began, and the sound of her name from his lips felt oddly intimate. "Your anger." It was a sound I had forgotten. He paused, his gaze sweeping over the astonished faces of the employees, then returning to Sarah. A sound that reminded me of feelings I thought were buried beneath centuries of cold. Sarah frowned, trying to understand. Centuries? What did he mean? He continued, his voice a low, steady rumble. "Your outrage, your fury for Maria's injustice. It was so pure, so human." A faint, almost sorrowful smile touched his pale lips. It reminded me of a time when I, too, felt such things. A time when I could be moved by the suffering of others, by unfairness. He shifted slightly, his gaze dropping to his clasped hands, then back to Sarah's face. "For so long, I have lived without such passions, without the warmth of true empathy, the fire of righteous indignation. My world became efficient, cold. I saw people as numbers, as pieces on a chessboard, to be moved and discarded as needed to prove a point, to maintain power." His eyes seemed to pierce through her, not with menace, but with a deep, unsettling honesty. "When you stood before me yesterday, in the boardroom, fearless despite your fear, and you spoke your heart, a spark ignited within me. A memory, a faint echo of what it truly means to feel, to care, to be alive in a way I haven't been for a very, very long time." He gestured vaguely with one hand, encompassing the silent crowd, the vast building itself. "I built this empire on fear. I maintained it with detachment. I believed it was the only way to endure. But your voice, Sarah, cut through the ice I had built around myself. It showed me the raw, untamed beauty of human spirit, a beauty I had long since dismissed as a weakness." A shiver ran down Sarah's spine, but it wasn't from fear. It was from the weight of his words, from the realization that this man, this powerful, feared being, was revealing something profoundly personal, something he had kept hidden for what sounded like an eternity. He wasn't punishing her. He was thanking her. He was confessing. He was showing her, and everyone else, that her simple, human outrage had touched something ancient and forgotten within him. It was a revelation that stripped away all her assumptions, leaving her utterly bewildered and yet, strangely, deeply moved. Mr. Kane remained kneeling, his gaze unwavering as he looked up at Sarah. The employees watched, breathless, as he began to speak again, his voice now even lower, a confidential murmur that nonetheless carried clearly through the stunned silence. "You called me cruel," he said, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. "You called me heartless, and you were right. More right than you know." He paused, a deep sigh escaping him, a sound that seemed to carry the weight of ages. "I'm not merely a man, Sarah. Not anymore. I am. Old. Very old. My life has spanned centuries, not decades." Sarah's eyes widened, a flicker of the old fear returning, mixing with the sheer disbelief. Centuries? Was he mad? But then she remembered the paleness, the strange light in his eyes, the ancient clothes, the way he moved. The whispers of vampire CEO suddenly didn't sound like a joke at all. "I was turned," he continued, his voice steady, long, long ago. in a time when the world was much different. At first, the change was exhilarating. Power beyond imagining, an endless existence. But with eternity comes a terrible price. Over time, the human feelings, the bonds, the empathy, they fade. They become distant echoes, like old songs you can barely remember the tune of. He looked around at the faces of the employees, who were now listening with rapt, terrified attention. I built this empire not just for power, but for purpose. To fill the void left by a heart that no longer beat with human warmth. I pushed people away. I cultivated fear because it was easier than trying to connect, trying to care, only to feel nothing in return. His eyes found Sarah's again. I became a monster, yes. Not the kind that hunts in the night, though that is my nature, but the kind that forgets what it means to be alive. I saw humanity as weak, as fleeting. Your passion, your anger for Maria, your selfless defense of another. It was a stark reminder of everything I had deliberately cast aside, everything I had lost. I forgot what it meant to care, he confessed, his voice tinged with a deep, ancient sorrow. I forgot the warmth of human connection, the fire of justice, the pain of empathy. I became a cold, calculating machine, driven by logic and the acquisition of power, because those were the only things that still made sense in my endless, emotionless existence. He lifted a hand, and for a moment, Sarah thought he might touch her, but he simply let it drop back to his knee. Your voice, Sarah, was a jolt, a spark that pierced through the centuries of ice I had encased myself in. It was a reminder that even in eternal life, there is something far more precious, far more vital than mere existence. It is the ability to feel, to truly live, to care for another. The air in the hall seemed to crackle with the weight of his confession. Sarah, and everyone else, now understood. The Vampire CEO wasn't just a nickname. It was the truth. And in that truth, a horrifying realization dawned. Their boss was a real monster, but a monster who, for the first time in centuries, was showing a flicker of humanity, thanks to a cleaner's brave act. Mr. Kane's confession hung in the air, a heavy, almost magical truth that resonated with everyone present. Sarah, still reeling from the revelation of his true nature, listened as he continued, his voice softer now, more focused on her. You, Sarah, he said, his luminous eyes fixed on hers. With your simple uniform and your fierce heart, you showed me what I had forgotten. Your bravery, standing against my power, risking everything for a fellow cleaner. That is what it means to be human. He took a slow, deep breath, a sound that seemed foreign coming from him. For centuries, I watched humanity from a distance, seeing only its flaws, its fleetingness, its capacity for cruelty. I saw no reason to engage, no reason to feel. I thought emotion was a weakness that had been mercifully stripped from me. He paused, a flicker of something almost like regret crossing his ancient features. But your defiance, your unwavering belief in fairness and kindness, even when faced with overwhelming odds, shattered that illusion. You reminded me that to be human is not to be weak, but to be strong in a way I had long since lost, he continued. It is to fight for what is right, even when it is terrifying. It is to feel deeply, to connect, to empathize. These are the very things I had forgotten, replaced by a cold, calculating logic that served only to perpetuate my own existence. He looked around at the silent crowd, then back to Sarah. I had become a monster not because of my nature, but because I chose to let go of the very qualities that define life. Your courage, Sarah, was a mirror. It reflected back to me the humanity I had buried so deep within myself, the part that still remembered what it felt like to care, to defend, to live with purpose beyond mere survival. A single tear, clear as crystal, traced a path down his pale cheek. It was a sight so unexpected, so profoundly human, that a quiet gasp rippled through the onlookers. This ancient, powerful being crying? It was a testament to the depth of emotion Sarah's actions had stirred within him. You have given me a gift, Sarah, he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. a chance to remember, to reclaim a part of myself I had thought was gone forever. You have shown me that even a creature like me, who has walked this earth for so long, can still learn, can still change. He slowly rose from his kneeling position, his eyes never leaving hers. The transition was smooth, effortless, but the impact of his humility remained. Your bravery, he reiterated, his voice regaining some of its former resonance, but now infused with a new, softer quality, has helped me remember what it truly means to be human. And for that, I am eternally grateful. The weight of his words settled over Sarah. She had expected to lose her job, her dignity, perhaps even her hope. Instead, she had somehow, miraculously, managed to stir the heart of a vampire, reminding him of his lost humanity. The realization was overwhelming, breathtaking, and utterly life-changing. The air in the main hall thrummed with a new, powerful energy. The collective gasp, the whispered exclamations, the sudden tears from some employees, it all painted a picture of a company shaken to its core. They had come expecting to witness a public execution of Sarah's career, but instead, they had become witnesses to a miracle. They had seen their fearsome, unfeeling CEO kneel, confess, and weep. In that single, breathtaking moment, the entire company learned a profound truth. Fear, which had been the bedrock of Mr. Kane's rule, the invisible chains that bound every employee, suddenly seemed fragile. It was not a grand display of power or wealth that had broken the fear, but a simple act of courage, a cleaner's unwavering belief in fairness. The employees looked at Sarah with new eyes. No longer was she just the invisible cleaner. She was the one who dared, the one who spoke truth to power, the one who, with her simple act of kindness and bravery, had somehow touched the untouchable. They saw that even against the most overwhelming, terrifying authority, a single voice, fueled by genuine emotion, could make a difference. The whispers began to spread, not of fear, but of wonder and a dawning hope. People who had been too afraid to even meet each other's gaze now exchanged knowing looks. The heavy atmosphere of dread that had permeated the building since Mr. Kane's arrival began to lift, replaced by a tentative sense of possibility. It was clear that the old ways were over. The era of ruthless, cold indifference, of arbitrary firings to prove a point, could not continue after such a public, raw display of vulnerability from their leader. Mr. Kane, the vampire CEO, had confessed his ancient burden, and in doing so, had exposed the very human need for connection and compassion that he had so desperately tried to suppress. The lesson was clear: being kind was not a weakness. Being brave was not a path to destruction, but to transformation. Sarah, a woman who had felt invisible, had shown them all that true strength lay not in power over others, but in the power of one's own convictions. Her anger, born of empathy for Maria, had become a catalyst for change that no one could have predicted. The employees realized that they too had a voice, that their silence had been a choice, and that choices could be changed. The fear of Mr. Kane had been absolute, but now, a new feeling was stirring in the hearts of many, a sense of shared humanity, a recognition that they were all in this together, and that mercy, not fear, could be the true foundation of their company. The cold, sterile building suddenly felt a little warmer, a little more alive, echoing with the unspoken promise of a different future. The realization dawned on everyone present, shimmering in the charged air. Even a monster could remember how to have a kind heart. Mr. Kane, who had just confessed to being a centuries-old vampire, a creature of the night, had shown a tear, a genuine emotion stirred by the courage of a simple cleaner. It was a powerful, almost unbelievable truth. For so long, the company had been ruled by an unseen, unfeeling force. Mr. Kane was a name whispered in fear, a pale, distant figure who made decisions that impacted lives without a hint of compassion. He was the embodiment of the cold corporate world, only more so, infused with an ancient, terrifying power. Many had simply accepted this as his nature, unchangeable, unyielding. But Sarah's anger, her passionate plea for justice, had cracked that impenetrable facade. It wasn't magic, not really, but it felt like it. It was the magic of empathy, the power of one human voice to reach across an unimaginable divide and touch something buried deep within a being who had forgotten what it was to feel. The employees now looked at Mr. Kane not just with fear, but with a new kind of understanding. He was still the powerful CEO, still the ancient vampire, but now he was also something else, a being capable of change, capable of remembering the softer parts of himself. His vulnerability, though shocking, made him seem less like an unassailable god and more like a deeply wounded soul. This profound moment taught them that compassion wasn't reserved for those who were already gentle. It could be awakened in the harshest of hearts, even those that had been hardened by centuries of existence without feeling. It showed them that no one was truly beyond redemption. No one was completely lost to kindness, no matter how monstrous they seemed. The very air in the building, once thick with tension and dread, now seemed to carry a different weight, a weight of hope, of shared humanity, even with a creature that was technically not human. The executives, who had been so quick to judge Maria's firing as a display of power, now saw it as a symptom of a much deeper, ancient pain within Mr. Kane. The story of Sarah and Mr. Kane would become a legend within the company, a reminder that every person, no matter their role or their outward appearance, carried the potential for kindness and the capacity to be touched by it. It was a lesson that resonated far beyond the confines of the main hall, echoing in the hearts of everyone who witnessed it. They had seen a monster remember his heart, and in doing so, they had rediscovered their own. The change wasn't instant like flipping a switch, but it was undeniable. The day after Mr. Kane's extraordinary confession, the company building felt different. The stifling silence was replaced by a cautious buzz, a murmur of conversation that held more curiosity than fear. Employees looked at each other with a new sense of connection, a shared experience that had broken down barriers. Mr. Kane himself set the tone. He didn't return to his detached, cold demeanor. Instead, he made immediate, tangible changes. Maria was not only rehired with an apology, but given a promotion and back pay. Mr. Kane held a company-wide meeting, not behind closed doors with executives, but in a main hall where everyone could attend. He spoke, not with his usual icy authority, but with a surprising gentleness, acknowledging his past ruthlessness and promising a new era. He spoke about respect, about listening, and about the value of every single person from the top executive to the newest cleaner. He established new policies, making sure that employee concerns were heard and acted upon. A suggestion box, once a joke, became a genuine channel for feedback. Managers were encouraged to interact more with their teams, not just to give orders, but to foster a sense of community. Sarah, no longer invisible, found herself at the heart of this transformation. She was given a new role, one where her insights into the daily workings of the building and the needs of her fellow cleaners were actively sought. She became a bridge, connecting the management to the staff, ensuring that the new promises of respect were truly carried out. Her opinions mattered. Her voice was heard. The building itself seemed to lighten. The once oppressive atmosphere lifted. Laughter, genuine and unrestrained, began to echo in the hallways. The office workers were less stressed, more collaborative. The cleaning staff, once overlooked, were now greeted with smiles and words of appreciation. Small acts of kindness became common, a ripple effect from Sarah's initial courage. Mr. Kane, while still maintaining his ancient presence, learned to engage. He'd occasionally join employees in the cafeteria, listening intently to their stories, offering surprisingly thoughtful advice. His pale eyes, once so unnerving, now held a depth that people found intriguing rather than terrifying. The vampire CEO became less a source of fear and more a figure of mystery and unexpected wisdom. The company truly changed for the better. It became a place where people felt valued, where their hard work was recognized, and where they were treated with the dignity they deserved. It was a place where mercy had broken fear, and where a monster, reminded of his heart, had led the way to a more humane future. The lessons learned that day in the main hall resonated through every department, proving that a single act of courage could indeed change an entire world, transforming a cold, fear-filled corporation into a thriving community built on respect and understanding.